Thanks, Celine, for sharing your garden with us. And now we're going to be talking about some great ground cover plants for Central Texas and beyond. Joining me is Michelle Pfluger from Green and Growing Nursery in downtown Pflugerville.
That's right, we have a downtown now.
It was great to have you on the program. You're part of Texas history. You're one of the Pfluger family from Pflugerville, so that's great. And you're a real native plant enthusiast.
I do. I love native plants. That's something my mother, who's also part of the nursery, really has shared with me, and we just really emphasize native plants in the landscape and using these plants.
Well, there's a lot of good ones here that are native, some introduced species, but everybody's looking for alternatives to turf right now.
Yes.
Anything.
Huge.
Anything. Thank you very much. And we have a lot of cool things to talk about, so let's dive in. Mountain pea is a little plant right here. And I have to say, I was unfamiliar with this plant until fairly recently, but where I work, there's a large bed of it planted, and it's spectacular.
Yes, it really is. This is one that's been fairly recently introduced into the trade. And if you've seen it, there's some great installations of it around town. It makes a really dense dark green ground cover. It's evergreen except in really hard winters. And the bright purple flowers in the summer are just very attractive. It's a great one.
Very hardy. Very low water use.
Very.
Grows only about, that I can see, about a foot tall.
About a foot is the very tallest, and it's normally a little bit shorter, but beautiful. If you want a lush green effect, that's a great one for that.
Yeah, so mountain pea, again, is the common name, and people should be on the lookout for it. Great in mass plantings.
It is beautiful in large mass
swaths.
plantings. Yeah, absolutely.
Now, people don't associate ferns with the Edwards Plateau that much.
They don't.
But here is a gorgeous one. This is called wavy cloak fern.
This is.
And, you know, I have seen this growing out in the full sun on limestone.
You have, yeah. If you've hiked in the hill country or been to some of the state parks, you might have seen this fern and a lot of related species. This is the most common one. But this one will get about 1 to 2 feet tall. It can go in quite a bit of sun, but it also can grow in partial shade. And it likes to be in dry, well-drained areas, which is very unusual for any fern.
Yeah, and one of the things I want to just highlight here is on the back side of this, you get that silvery effect on the foliage often that is just really lovely.
It's a beautiful fern.
Yeah, I
love
really
that
love
plant.
it. And, you get that xeric plant, but with that kind of woodlands look.
Yeah, a lot of people, they want the dryland, they want plants that can go dry, but they also want plants that look lush and full, and that plant really helps provide that look and kind of that wood fern that we think of with woodlands.
Yeah, right. Well, the next plant is called snake herb, not for any reptilian reasons. I don't know why it's called that, but this is one that you say makes a great ground cover.
Great ground cover. This one's really east of 35 in the Blackland Prairie area. This is going to be a fairly common plant you would find in grasslands. But it can grow along forest edges and shadier spots as well. It's very thick, it's a very rapid grower, really good spreader. You better want it. Beautiful.
I like plants like that.
Yeah, they're great. If you need to cover some ground, it does incredibly well through drought too. Beautiful purple flowers in the spring through about June, July. The hummingbirds really like them too. And they're, lovely.
So a tubular kind of flower?
It is. It's a little purple tubular flower about that long.
About an inch long.
Up and down the stems, and it's really lovely in bloom. And it's just a very thick green mounds. It's really beautiful in large masses.
Okay, so again, snake herb.
Snake herb.
And I don't think we've ever talked about it. It's a great looking plant. Behind it, we have a Mexican spiderwort, which is a new introduction. The spiderworts are spectacular in our region.
They are. And this one is out of northern Mexico, and it's one of those great little plants out of that region that really does well around here. It will reseed and move around the yard a little bit, but it's very easy to pick up if you don't like it.
Right.
But I love the purple polka dotted foliage, and the little purple flowers are very great in the landscape. And it can take, it does very well in dry areas. If we get very dry like we did in the drought the summer before last, mine did go summer dormant, but they came back with the rains and have done great.
Okay.
So that's a neat textural foliage color plant.
Well, and sounds like very well adapted for our region.
It does great.
And right next to that, we have one of its cousins, which is cobweb plant.
Yeah, this is one of my favorite ground covers for dry shade. It's very drought tolerant. It does the beautiful kind of silver Foliage, the purple flowers through the summer months, very compact and does very, very well around here. And people aren't really familiar with this plant, and great texture in the garden as well.
Well, I'm crazy about all the plants in that family, I think.
Yeah.
And the flowers are so bright and just keep blooming and blooming and blooming.
All the time. Mine normally in my yard is blooming from March through sometimes December.
Okay, so again, Cobweb plant is the name of that.
That's Cobweb.
Hill country sedge. I love the sedges. These are tough as nails.
They are. They're some of the best ground covers for air, especially if you're wanting an evergreen ground cover under trees. This is something you're going to see throughout Texas woodlands. There's a lot of different species. This is a hill country sedge, and it makes a nice evergreen ground cover.
Yeah.
There's not much more you can say about it.
Fairly drought tolerant.
Yeah, they're very good.
And just a really terrific grassy, soft look. If you really want to soften up that, if you live out especially on the Edwards Plateau, and you have cedars and lots of oak, and you have bare ground, you want something to grow, this is a great plant for it.
Yeah, and that's where you'll see it a lot growing naturally too,
Yeah,
and it's and it's perfect for it.
Well, there's a fragrant mistflower is our next plant, and this is one that's not your typical mistflower. This is one that only you are propagating.
In this area, I seem to be. This is a really neat one native to South Texas, and it's more of it's not really a ground cover, it's more of an understory plant. It likes to weave up through shrubs and trees and bloom in the fall with the monarch migration primarily.
Okay.
Very drought tolerant, and it is a beautiful, beautiful flowering plant for woodland areas.
Now, a lot of these mistflowers can be a little bit rambunctious. Is this one?
This one doesn't have a spreading root system, so it stays in place really well, but it is, it's a rambler, so it will go up and out and around, but it doesn't really go out like the Greg's, which it does.
Yes, right. But beautiful plant and great for the wildlife, obviously, with the hummingbird migration. And one that is, again, a new entry in the Texas natives, which is wonderful. Right next to it's an old favorite, but I wanted to include it because this is so dependable for those woodlands and shady areas, and makes a great ground cover if you seed it out heavily.
You're right. It's absolutely one of my favorite flowering plants for shady areas.
Salvia coccinea, or tropical sage, is a common name often applied.
And it is one. And you can also find, as you were mentioning earlier, in white and pink versions that are really lovely. This is the typical red version you would see in South Texas. It will reseed and spread around the yard, and that's also makes it make a great ground cover. And that's a beautiful one, and hummingbirds love it, and great color in the yard.
Yeah. And, it's a dependable perennial and can actually be mowed. And if you do it just once or twice a year.
Yeah, you absolutely, and that helps thicken it up and branch it out more.
Right,
It looks great.
Well, the next plant is a Manfreda, which, again, for ground cover and dry shade, it doesn't get much better than this one.
It is really great. And this is specifically the Silver Leopard, and it has a wonderful purple polka dotted foliage. The other things, it has a really neat flower spike in late spring that'll come up that's creamy. Yeah, it's neat.
Alien looking flowers.
They are alien looking, and they have huge nectar droplets, which you might notice if the hummingbirds don't get to them first. But that's a wonderful plant. I like to use it as a small scale ground cover as an accent plant with other ground covers. It's one of my favorites.
And they can take some sun.
Absolutely,
or shade. They're happy in either one, it seems.
They are. They're really just one of those very easygoing plants. And they're really great, I think, for those areas where you get shade and then you get blasted by some sun at different times of the day, which can be challenging.
Right. Yeah, more than a little challenging. But I recommend nearly all of the different variants of the Manfredas, also sometimes called false aloes, just terrific plants. Now, the next plant that you brought along is one of the Aspidistras, and this is one that I've gardened with in the past. I love Aspidistra. I mean, you need a plant that grows in the dark.
Yes.
Occasionally, right? Something in the dark corners. And
that is the only place Aspidistra does well. It is very sensitive to sunlight. It will burn.
This one is particularly sensitive.
Yeah, and this one is in particular, but it has also these wonderful speckled leaves, which give you a little bit of color. But for really, really heavy shade where other plants just don't do well, the Aspidistras are fantastic. And specifically, the Milky Way is one of my favorites. It's a little bit lower growing than the typical cast iron plant.
Yeah, right.
Which is nice too.
And they're colonizing. They'll slowly spread out.
Yes.
And they're super dependable. Even in the drought last year, I only had to water some of I have large swaths of Aspidistra in my current garden. I think I water them twice, you know.
Yeah, when they're well established, they're very drought tolerant, and they can really hold their own with native plants in that regard.
Real briefly, we want to mention the last plant you brought along. I'm intrigued by this African hosta.
Yeah, I brought it because it's just a great replacement for the hosta when you're wanting something with that wide leaf, but something that's drought tolerant. It's a bulbing plant, and it also have a little white flower in the spring that's quite pretty. But the foliage is really great. It makes a great little small-scale ground cover or a little special contrasting plant with some of your other ground covers, and it is quite drought tolerant.
Yeah, well, if people could, it's got a waxy leaf, which is a tip that it's got drought tolerance, and real interesting above ground corm or bulb.
It does, and it's a wonderful plant to grow, and it is easily divided and shared and moved around the yard, which I think is a neat trait in a plant.
Yeah. Well, lots of cool things to talk about, natives and cool introduced species. Michelle Pfluger, thanks so much for being our guest.
Thanks for having me.
And I hope folks will check you out at Green and Growing in downtown Pflugerville. I like saying that.
We have a downtown now.
All right, thanks so much. And coming up next is our friend Daphne.